Welcome to today's Schwartz Round. For those of you who don't know me or who are here for the first time in particular, welcome. My name is Peter Wilkinson. I'm the clinical lead for the Schwartz Rounds. Delighted to welcome the panelists here today to tell their stories. This is our fourth year, if you like, of Schwartz Rounds. We've been running them for 4 years. And I'd just like to thank all the people over that time who've told their stories, and also the people who've been in the audience as well to share those stories. They've been very powerful stories at times, very emotional, but I think they've told all of us about the pressures about working in healthcare, but also the importance of sharing stories and sharing emotions with people, because if we don't do that and bottle it up, it's not good for us, is it? And it's not good for our patients. So the usual Schwartz Rounds rules, if I can put them as strongly as that. The conversation today is confidential, as you're aware. The themes you can discuss outside the room, but not the people. So on to the stories, and I'm just going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves, and then we'll go on to the stories.
I'm Paul Crawshaw. I was a consultant on the neonatal unit here for 22 years and retired just a few weeks ago.
I'm the Reverend Virginia Smith. I'm an honorary chaplain here, and if you like, my parish within the hospital is the neonatal unit and paediatrics, so that's mostly where you'll find me.
And I'm Sarah Faulkner. I'm a deputy sister on the neonatal unit.
Thank you very much. So Paul, over to you, please.
We were fairly sure from early ultrasound scans of the brain that this baby had an abnormal brain from birth. And we went on to do an MRI scan which confirmed that. You can never be 100% sure, but you can be sure enough that the outlook is so poor that for some babies it's not the right thing to continue treating. And we began having those conversations probably about the first week of life. I can't remember the exact date. And that was really difficult because we're used to working with parents who, not surprisingly, don't want to stop the care of their baby. That's not unusual. We deal with that all the time. We work with them. We always work as a team. And in this particular case, we came up against, from my point of view, a brick wall. They weren't open to our professional views about the way this sort of case should happen. So we always aim for a baby not to die on a ventilator. We don't think it feels right for the family. And sadly, that did happen in this case. And it was quite difficult to understand what was the reason for their failure to engage. Partly was cultural. They're from a different part of Europe where they had a different set of beliefs. So for me, the overwhelming feelings were frustration that I can't work with a family and disappointment that we were continuing treatments that were not going to help this baby in any way. And I don't think that happened to me at all in the 22 years I was here. We never got to such a sad situation.
Thank you, Paul.
From my perspective, it was very similar, but being part of the nursing staff, you tend to have a lot more to do with the family than perhaps the medical staff does on a day-to-day basis. We were trying very hard to work with this family. We don't generally tend to look after babies, we tend to look after families as a whole. It was very upsetting for the nursing staff to look after this family. Once we knew that there wasn't a very good outlook for this baby, we could see that this baby was suffering, and this baby was suffering a lot. This baby also had an older brother who turned 4 on the day she died, which was quite hard. He came in at 4 o'clock in the morning and he was sitting there holding his sister, singing to her on his 4th birthday. So there was more than just the baby and the parents involved in this scenario. There was another child. We tried to help out as much as we could, but it was very upsetting for all the nursing staff involved to see what this child was going through and also the effect it had on their family.
Thank you very much. Do you want to say anything more?
No.
All right, thank you.
My experience with this family was very different because, put quite simply, they didn't want to know me. The word I'd use is rejection. Whereas normally when I go in and introduce myself, families are quite happy to talk to me, and they just didn't want to know me. You just feel failure. that you haven't been able to do that. But there was this great feeling of rejection, which was the most powerful, I suppose, that I wasn't wanted, couldn't be used.
Okay, so this part of the round is where we move on from listening to the panel's stories to opening it up to yourselves. This is your opportunity to reflect on what you've heard. When we're busy in our work lives, we don't often take that time to just sit. So if there's some silences, just enjoy that opportunity to reflect, that's fine.
I'd just like to say thank you very much to the panel for being so open. It's difficult to get the balance between the job that we do and being able to give a professional care and respond in the ways that they want us to be and strong, but also acknowledge that we're human, we have feelings, and it touches us as well. So thank you for sharing that.
Just on that very subject, I was looking after a baby who also passed away, and the baby only lived for 48 hours, and the parents particularly wanted me to go to the funeral because I was one of only 2 other people that had met their baby, and it was very important to them to have people who had actually met their baby when they were alive at that funeral. And it was good. It did help me to process what had happened for my own personal benefit as well. So it's good.
So I'm a non-clinician, and I always find it really surprising when I hear stories where your clinical expertise and your advice to patients, or in this case to their family, is not taken. And I always find it so surprising that you get to the extreme of, as clinicians, thinking that the patient that you're looking after is suffering, and that's such a hard thing to, I'm sure, go through.
Any other reflections on that situation?
I just wanted to reflect on some of the comments Paul made with regard to the use of the word failure. And sometimes we use failure versus unsuccessful. And failure can have the connotation that perhaps you haven't tried hard enough. And it may not necessarily convey that you can put in all the effort, put in all your experience, use a lot of teamwork, use the right words, but still not arrive at a successful outcome. And that can be difficult to deal with, but is not in itself necessarily a failure.
It's just really a comment. I also work with the neonatal team about, and you asked about questioning expertise. I'd almost challenge that, because I think we encourage our families to ask us questions, you know, and I would actually encourage them to ask us questions and to challenge things, and I think our role is to be able to answer those questions.
I've been pondering whether to share something, and I think I will, because the 2 words that come up that resonate with me most is the failure and the rejection. And having been, I'm a clinician myself, but having been on the other side of this as a parent 20 years ago of a very, very sick child, and it's still quite hard to talk about, so the 2 feelings that I had most through my entire time of a very effective, very competent clinical team who kept me updated, who communicated, who gave me the plans, who talked to me, who engaged with me, the 2 things that I felt the whole way were failure and rejection. And that's as a parent. So the rejection of you is not because we won't engage with the spiritual bit. For me, it was the failure as a parent, and I couldn't, it meant the end of the road, and I couldn't do that.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you. Any last reflections from the audience? I think the thing that I've taken away from this is that having good relationships with the people that we care for and their families is massively important, and it's when those break down that it's harder. But also what we go through sometimes when we're caring for somebody who's so sick and you perhaps know that they're going to die, and the emotions that you have if you don't think the right thing's being done is hard to deal with. And it's really important that we do share these emotions, because we know from research that keeping this kind of stuff bottled inside will eventually will burn out, and that's when our compassion and our empathy goes. And I think the neonatal team are a fantastic example of great teamwork, great compassion, and thank you for sharing your stories.